A quick 3-game pit stop in Toronto, back home to face the Phillies. Brice, Turang, and Freddy Peralta picking up some August hardware. And Shelby Miller done for the year in one of many not-so-great developments for the bullpen within the last week. This is the Brewer Fanatic podcast. We have a lot to go through this week. But as I always do, before we start all of that, I need to ask how Spencer's doing. So how are you doing, Spencer?
Doing well. We got fall ball in full swing now. Good first week so far, so that's been good to see. I think the guys are happy to be there, which is not always been the case in the past. So very, very excited to get going. And yeah, I don't know. Otherwise, it's been busy, but it's been good, and I'm doing all right. How about you, Jack?
I can say the same. I don't have too much to add to that.
Good.
Let's jump in this week, shall we?
Yes, let's do it.
We'll start with the 3-game series against the Blue Jays in Toronto. Very quick stop up north for the Brewers. In game 1, they would win this one by a final of 7-2. Freddy Peralta taking the bump for this one, giving the Brewers 6 shutout, allowing just 1 hit and a walk, punching out 8, one of his better starts of the season. Andre Monasterio continued his hot stretch with a solo home run in the 6th inning. That was followed by Andrew Vaughn and Caleb Durbin RBI singles, and then a 2-run double by Isaac Collins, really stretching that lead a little bit for the Brewers. Then in the 7th, Milwaukee adding 2 more on a Christian Yelich RBI ground out and another Andrew Vaughn RBI base hit. Aaron Ashby pitched in this one for some reason when the Brewers were up by quite a lot at the time. So we'll talk about that as we keep going. Shelby Miller and Abner Uribe also pitching in this one again for some reason. I'm guessing, again, just speculating, knowing Pat Murphy, maybe he's looking at the fact that the Blue Jays are a good team, and in his mind, no lead was safe and they needed to win this game. I don't know, but we've talked about it plenty. Like these guys they should not be pitching in these games because that's just a recipe for overuse, and we'll kind of tackle that as we get into some of the more recent developments with the bullpen. But those guys did close out what was a nice, convincing Game 1 victory for the Brewers. Game 2 would be a little bit closer, 4-1. Quinn Priester getting the ball in this one, 6 innings for him, 5 hits, 3 Ks, and the only run that he allowed was an unearned run. Brice Turang made a throwing error in the 6th inning, kind of continuing his season in which he's been very, very good at the plate and still largely quite good with the glove, but not quite at the same caliber that we had seen in the past. But good effort for Priester in this one. Sal Frelick tying it in the 7th inning with a ground out. The Brewers really getting a lot of their action happening late in this one off of Blue Jays closer Jeff Hoffman. Ashby again pitching in this one, recording the final out of the 8th inning. And this one makes a little more sense because it was a close game, a tight game, but that was his 4th outing in 6 days at that point. So he had already thrown 90 pitches between his 3 previous outings, including 26 in that first game of the series when he gave up a couple when he was asked to pitch in what was already a pretty healthy lead, well out of leverage territory. But again, we'll talk about that later on. I mentioned the Brewers doing some damage against Jeff Hoffman in the 9th. Jackson Chourio hitting a go-ahead home run to give the Brewers a lead. Christian Yelich going back-to-back with him then, next hitter. And Isaac Collins adding an RBI double. Abner Uribe then closing this one out for the save. Game 3, this would be a very uncharacteristic showing for the Brewers. So we're very used to pitching and defense and base running and maybe not a ton of slug. This one was effectively the opposite of that in just about every way imaginable. The Brewers did not play good defense. They made, we don't have it in the notes, but they made several outs on the bases. I think did they make like 4 outs on the bases in this game?
At least 3 for sure, yeah.
It was a day that had Pat Murphy looking displeased in the dugout. We'll say that much. And then on the defensive side, like I said, not great. Offensively, William Contreras hit a 2-run home run. Brice Turang hit a home run. William Contreras also an RBI single, but a little more slug for the Brewers in this one to get them the 4 runs that they scored. But back to the run prevention side, Brandon Woodruff, 4 1/3 for him. This is another outing in which the results not looking good. He allowed 10 hits in this one, walked a couple, 3 strikeouts, 8 runs, only 5 of them earned because there was a pretty pivotal first inning error in this one that gave the Blue Jays an early lead, giving them those 3 unearned runs. Tobias Myers, though, was able to kind of eat up some innings out of the bullpen once again, 2 2/3 for him, not giving up any runs. But to go back to Woodruff here, I think that this is another outing where I don't think he threw the ball as badly as that line indicates, even the 5 earned versus the 8 total. He didn't get hit super hard in this one. The Blue Jays did kind of the Brewers a little bit with some of the balls that they had hit in play that were going for hits against Woodruff. But at the same time, there was basically no swing and miss for him in this start at all with any of his pitches. And that's the one area where you're kind of like, okay, this isn't quite the same as some of the other starts. Like you look back at the Diamondback start where there was a ton of swing and miss, dominant through 5, and then some things not going his way in that final inning. That's a little bit of a different story. In this one, you had an outing where, I don't think it deserved to be this bad, but the lack of swing and miss, I think, kind of put him in a position where you're going to be subject to some stuff like this once in a while.
Yeah, it's like we've talked about with a lot of Brewers pitchers throughout the season. Early on with DL Hall, we talked about how, yes, he's getting very good results, but you're kind of seeing what can happen later now that he's been hurt for a while now. But as he was starting to kind of wind down before the injury, you're starting to see some of that batted ball luck go against him because you're not getting swing and miss. Eventually, there's just going to be some bad luck for a pitcher if he's constantly having the ball in play. And in this game, that was kind of the case for Woodruff. It's not always the case for Woodruff like it is for Hall this season. But this is what can happen when you have a lot of balls in play, and it's a good offense. And Brewers not playing their best defense of the season in this stretch in general, I would say. We saw it obviously in this game and also beyond even the errors. I think there were some plays that you would have thought maybe would be caught. I think Chourio was in one of his first games back. He seemed a little hesitant to go full bore after a couple of balls. Just stuff like that. I think there was a lot of things that was happening in this one. But yeah, this is what can happen when a pitcher isn't getting swing and miss. And that was the case for Woodruff in this one. And I agree with you. I didn't think the stuff was that much worse. I didn't think the command was that much worse. I think he just had a lot of balls in play, and this can kind of happen. It's more likely to happen to the current version of Woodruff than the version we are used to seeing in the past. Like, this type of game is more likely to happen to him than what we had seen when he was fully healthy before the injury, because he doesn't get as much swing and miss now. I keep saying that, but like, he has been getting a decent amount of swing and miss, more than I think we both anticipated. Maybe this was a little more in line with the type of process and peripheral type stuff that we would have expected from Woodruff in the return. But again, I think there was a lot of bad luck involved here, and I really don't think that line is indicative of the way he pitched.
I believe he was getting more swing and miss than in the past leading into this start. So since he had returned before this outing, I think the whiff rate was even higher than it had been before.
Yeah, I mean, he's been getting a lot for sure. I hadn't looked at the exact number, but I guess, yeah, I would buy it.
I do think that still, though, this is kind of this is more along the lines of how I maybe would have expected this stuff to play at times with the diminished velocity. And you look at his numbers on the season now, he's at what, like a 3.10 ERA with largely matching peripherals. I think that's even still a little better than I was expecting, but we are kind of inching closer to kind of the bar that we had set, which was, if he's throwing 92, 93, maybe occasionally ramping it up, like that seems like a maybe mid 3s ERA guy when you add in that he knows how to use that stuff and he knows how to sequence and he's got good command, all those kinds of things. So I've seen some people like starting to express a little concern about him. I'm still really not all that worried. I think it was just so good coming back immediately, like way better than anybody could have expected. So I think you got to be prepared then for some outings like this to hit. But I think when it all comes out in the wash, and especially once we get to playoff time, he's still a guy that I'm not too concerned about. I do still think he's kind of settling into sort of where that more sustainable level of production is going to be for him with this kind of stuff. And we have still seen it too. Like he is still capable of a really big outing when all the things are going right with what he has right now.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think this is anything that should cause a lot of concern for people. I think, like you said, this is kind of just it hit quickly, but it's some regression to the mean, and it's starting to kind of show more what his true numbers are more likely to kind of end up being at the end of the stretch, at the end of the regular season. So there was going to be some of this. He's been very, very good, but probably better than anyone could have expected, including himself, I would imagine. And yeah, I think some of this was kind of just due to happen at some point.
Let's talk about some hardware. A couple of Brewers taking home MLB awards in the month of August. Those were announced after this series. Brice Turang won National League Player of the Month. Not especially surprising given the last several weeks that he's had, but we'll rattle off a couple of the numbers really quick. So he led all MLB hitters in August in slugging percentage at 694, OPS at 1,092, total bases was 75, and WRC plus at 200. That meant that he was 100% better than a league average hitter during the month of August. And he was tied fourth with 10 home runs. We've talked plenty about how the power surges happened and all that kind of stuff, so we don't need to rehash that whole deal. But very deserving accolade for Brice Turang after the month that he put up. And I was talking about this in pregame. Actually, I asked Pat Murphy this a couple days ago. Like, is Brice Turang a really good example of kind of how the development process can look, like the step by step nature of it for a hitter? Because I think in a lot of ways it is. You go from being the worst hitter in Major League Baseball as a rookie and being unable to do anything with a fastball. And I'll be the first one to go back and acknowledge that I really had no faith in him being a solid big league hitter at that point, seeing how bad it was at the start. But I was wrong about that because you look at how he's developed over the last couple of years. Last season, like kind of going back to the basics, cutting down a lot of the extra movement and all this stuff in his swing, shortening up, kind of getting that ability to use all fields, put the ball in play a little more. And now in year 3, you're seeing him kind of go back to some of that stuff that he had as a rookie, finding the middle ground, finding some changes to the stance, to the setup, getting stronger, adding a lot of bat speed, and now being able to more naturally drive the ball, get it out in front a little bit more, and hit some homers to the pull side. Like, this just seems like a really natural, well-structured progression for a hitter. Like, struggling in year 1, gets the basic skills down in year 2 that he needs to have a decent floor, and then starting to do some of the other stuff to tap into the ceiling in year 3.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened, and I think that's a really good way to lay it out. Like that, he needed a swing overhaul and an approach overhaul after his first season. Like there was a lot that needed to happen. That couldn't happen in one offseason, in one winter. That wasn't going to be an immediate fix on both of those. But you could go back to the basics, like you said, and really simplify things and say, hey, first of all, we got to start making contact with velocity because that was a huge problem. Like you said, he really, really struggled against fastballs his rookie season. So we got to be able to hit velocity if we're going to hit in the big leagues. We got to tone down the swing a little bit and make it more repeatable, make it something we can do every single time. He did that. And last season, I still don't think that was the quantum leap that the manager seemed to want to kind of. I think Murph might have deserved a check in his check game for how much he likes to tote how he made that quantum leap after he predicted it. I feel like that might be a check for Murph. Everyone, the thing they've been talking about a lot, but this year he has made the quantum leap, and this is a real leap because he took that step back, he simplified things, And then, as you wrote about and he's talked about a little bit, and the Brewers and everybody have acknowledged, like, he was able to build off of a better base than he had his rookie season. He had a pretty bad base to work with his rookie year. He came back his second year, gave himself a nice base to work off of, a nice improvement in approach, in swing, in the mechanics of everything. And then he comes back and he's able to add bat speed. He's able to take the approach to try and lift the ball a little bit more, maybe to the pull side a little bit more. Very, very good Fangraphs article came out today as well, speaking to some of this and how Turang has actually been one of the best at hitting the ball hard when he hits it in the air in all of baseball, up there with names like Pete Alonso, Shohei Ohtani. When he elevates the ball, he's doing it at a hard hit rate, and it's impressive. That's not something I was expecting to see. I knew he was doing it a decent amount, but just some of the names he was surrounded by. And yeah, I think this is a perfect way, not a perfect way. It can't be a one size fits all, but this is a really good example of how you can develop a hitter at the big league level. Turang was obviously providing a lot of value on the bases and on the defensive side, so you could afford to wait around a little bit on the bat. That's not the case for everyone. If the bat was as bad as Turang's his rookie year and he didn't play defense and he wasn't stealing bases, there's a chance they wouldn't have had the opportunity to kind of work this out and let it play out at the big league level. It might have taken more time in AAA, or it may just not have happened for certain people. It might have happened at a secondary stop because the Brewers just didn't have that value there. But he was able to provide value the whole time.
Moving on to the pitching side, Freddy Peralta took home the honors for National League Pitcher of the Month. I didn't even realize this until he won the award. He gave up 1 run in the month of August. And maybe that's because I had seen some of the starts where he would run into traffic one inning and he kind of had to labor a little bit. And, the high pitch count, all this stuff was still very much there, including in his start on Thursday, where again, like the Phillies couldn't touch him, but it was the deep counts. It was a couple walks, like all this kind of stuff. But then at the end of the month, you take a step back and you see 1 earned run the entire month. So that's a .32 ERA, the lowest in baseball among starters in August. A 117 opponent batting average, 31.8% strikeout rate, all of that stuff leading starters in August. So kind of something that was like right in front of your face the entire month, and maybe we didn't appreciate until or at least I maybe didn't fully realize until I saw some of these numbers and saw that he came home with the award. A really, really good month for Freddy Peralta. And maybe if he didn't always go quite as deep as you would prefer, that's still very, very useful for a pitching staff that has needed a little bit of stability over these last few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really the theme of the season for him. We've talked about it early on. I think he was giving you both the length and pretty good just output in general, but probably since the June-ish area, we've been talking about how, his results have been pretty good, but he's not giving you super deep starts very consistently. And like, I think Murph talked about it after the game on Thursday today. And just kind of talked about how, like, yeah, that might be the case, but I think that's kind of the line between like superstardom and being very good right now. And he's been very good all season, but especially this past month. And like you, I knew a little bit earlier. I knew before these numbers came out. I think his last start of August, just how good the numbers looked, but it was still a surprise to me. I mean, I think back to the start at Wrigley where he loaded the bases and then he ended up getting out of it. But like in my mind, like there were a number of those times during the month, and I don't even think that was the case. I think maybe 2 or 3 times the whole month, but it just sticks out in your head because it does feel like for a guy like Freddy, when it falls apart, it can fall apart like for 2 or 3 batters, and it can look really bad, and everyone kind of remembers that little stretch where he lost his command, he lost his feel for his pitches. But this month he got through those innings. Like they pushed the pitch count up, and that's what caused him to not be able to go as deep into games in some of them, but he got through them. And then every game he left, the Brewers were in a very good position to win the game. And obviously, if you only give up 1 earned run the whole month, that's going to be the case. But yeah, I think it's just kind of a microcosm of his entire season where it's a better version of that, but it's it's kind of what he's been doing all year, where it's been very good, and maybe we haven't even given him enough credit for the whole and being available every start. Like, he's not missing starts. He's out there. He's pitching every time. And yes, he might not be giving you 6 innings each start, but on the whole, over the course of a season, he's probably giving you more innings than a lot of pitchers who are able to maybe give you 6 start to start, but they miss some starts. They go on the IL once or twice a year. Like, it's still, on the whole, overall, he's giving the Brewers a lot of innings, and it's been really important for this pitching staff.
Let's break down the 3-game series against the Phillies. The Brewers returning home to take on Philadelphia. If you remember, they swept them in Philly earlier in the year, but the Phillies would have the last laugh in this one because they would take 2 out of 3 from the Brewers, starting with game 1, a game that Philadelphia won 10-8. So this one, there was a lot that happened in this one, a lot of back and forth, a lot of instances of the bullpen not looking particularly sharp or rested or any of that. But we'll start from the beginning. The Brewers jumped out to an early 4-0 lead. Brice Turang homered. Blake Perkins hit a 2-run double. Caleb Durbin homered. Not a cheap shot either for Durbin. He's hit a couple of very well struck home runs in the last couple of weeks, and he deserves a little more credit for that than I think we've given him. But early lead for the Brewers. Jacob Misiorowski on the bump. 4 1/3 for him, 6 hits, 1 walk, 4 strikeouts, 3 runs, but really just the damage coming on a home run for Miz in this one. And again, he looking into post game, he took a pretty optimistic route. When he talked about this start, he feels like he's on the right track. He's doing a lot of the right things, and again, for me, it's mainly just like the strikeout to walk. One walk, 4 Ks. A lot of swing and miss for him in this one too, probably even a little more than you might think from the 4 Ks. I believe his whiff rate in this one was like somewhere around 40%. Like, the Phillies were not, even the 6 hits is a little misleading when you're looking at like the caliber of the swings here. Obviously, one big swing kind of hurting it a little bit. And really it was the 5th inning mainly where things just not able to get out of that frame. It seems like the beginning has been a little bit of a theme in some of these starts, but I think by and large, you got to take a step back and remember this is not anything unprecedented by any means for a young pitcher. Like, you can look back to, even like we just talked about, Brandon Woodruff. He's a very good example of this. Brandon Woodruff in 2019, for the most part, very, very good. But it seemed like in a lot of those starts, he would have the big inning that would kind of keep him from going deep, or this stretch of like 3 or 4 batters where things don't go so great. And I think we're kind of seeing a little bit of that with Miz right now.
Yes, 100% agree. This has been a common theme for a lot of Brewers pitchers, a lot of young pitchers in baseball in general. Like, this is usually how good young pitchers get beat, is they give up a couple hits, something they're not super used to. Maybe they walk a guy, they've got base runners on, something that they just haven't had to worry about a ton. And all of a sudden it spirals on them a little bit, and they don't necessarily know exactly how to work through that at that point. Woodruff is a perfect example. He's who I would have used if you didn't bring him up. But Freddy also had that problem a lot more when he was younger. Like, he'll still run into it from time to time, and that's just the nature of the way he pitches. But Freddy has learned, like we saw in August, how to work around some of the traffic that he might have to deal with, and how to work around maybe guys stringing a couple hits together and limit it to 1 run if he does give up a run that inning. And that's something that just it takes some time. It takes some experience. And I go back to the first Cubs start when Yelich talked about it afterwards and said, this is my favorite start of his so far, because he was able to figure things out and get through it and then find a way to help us, take up 3 more innings and keep us in the game and give us a chance to win. And those types of things are just going to continue to happen to a young pitcher, and it's about responding well. And I've seen people on social media who don't really like the way he's been answering questions during post game, and they think it's kind of just like, in some people's eyes, I think they think he's like ignoring that things aren't going super well on the results side. And in my eyes, I think this is a young pitcher who understands his process pretty well from what I can tell when he talks. Like, I think he has a pretty good idea of what he needs to do, what works best, and what he, if he's actually executing how he wants to. And in this one, I would agree with him, and everything you just talked about for that reason. Like, there was a lot of swing and miss. There wasn't a ton of hard contact. They obviously got one, and it was a decently big swing, but like, he did a lot of good things here, and there's a lot of good process stuff that didn't end up showing in that final line. I'm not super concerned about him. I've seen a lot of talk about him going to the bullpen. I think we can save that for later in September, that type of talk, and decide then once we're actually looking at what the playoff picture looks like and everything else. But for me, right now especially, he's not moving to the bullpen. He's making starts, and I would like him to continue to make starts. And I really do think, like, mentally he actually has a good idea of what he needs to do, what he's trying to do, and when he's doing it decently. And maybe the results don't line up with that all the time. That's just the way it goes in baseball. It's the way it goes with pitching, hitting, anything. Like, you can have a decent process, you can be executing decently, and the results might not show that from game to game. Over the long haul, they usually do. Not always, especially in one specific season or a couple months or whatever, but like, usually it ends up evening out the way it's supposed to if you have a good process and you're doing a lot of things right. And I think he is doing a lot of things right. Not everything, but a lot of them. So personally, I hope he continues to get starts. And again, we can figure out the playoff stuff when we get there. But I didn't think he pitched anywhere near what that line would kind of say in that game.
Just for accuracy's sake, I should probably take a step back. I think I made it sound like it was the one home run swing that did all the damage. Bryce Harper's solo shot was that. It was a solo shot in the fourth, and then there was a couple loud contacts in the fifth when he couldn't get through that inning. But still, like, not an outing where he was actually getting tagged super hard. 3 earned runs in 4 1/3. That's not going to look great
Right
in the box score. But yeah, I think it was probably closer to the way that he was characterizing it post game than I think a lot of people were thinking when you look at that line. As far as what the role might look like for him, I mean, the Brewers have been very clear about this. They want to keep giving him starts, and I think there are too many people who are acting like you can just snap your fingers and kick a guy to the bullpen, a young guy to the bullpen, and it's gonna be a-okay. I know he did it last year in Nashville a little bit down the stretch, but that's a little bit of a different context and a different setting. I really think that he's better off staying in some kind of routine, especially right now because he's become so entrenched in it. I think the longer he keeps starting, the harder it's going to be to make that transition. And I don't even know if that's necessarily an option where with 1 week left in the regular season, you can say, oh, hey, you're going to pitch out of the pen now because that's how we want to use you in October. If anything, I'm starting to think that the more likely scenario might be he starts a playoff game as part of a planned tandem start. So he goes out there
Yeah.
first with the Brewers only planning for maybe 3 innings. Maybe he can keep going if it's a good Miz night and you just kind of let him ride, but you send him out there, you plan on him giving you 3, maybe even only 2, and then you have somebody behind him, whether that's a Quinn Priester, maybe it is a Jose Quintana. I would not really want Jose Quintana starting a playoff game or being the bulk guy for a playoff game, but kind of that sort of structure, I think, is far more likely the way they could go. I think it could work really well with Priester, actually, because Priester is used to doing it. He's pitched behind an opener quite a few times this year, so maybe that's kind of the way that you would line it up. But I think they've got some options there, and to me, that seems a little bit more realistic than just moving him into a relief role late in the year after he's been starting all year. He's a 23-year-old rookie. Like, he's not going to be used to having to get up at a moment's notice in a very meaningful game and just having to go through the routines of all that stuff. Like, to me, that's going to be more rattling for him and more jarring for him than just, hey, start a playoff game and see if you can give us 3 really good innings.
Yeah, I actually had that conversation with some people on Twitter today in the DMs. I think a lot of people kind of view it as just a really easy switch. And I get it. Like, if you haven't ever had to go through it as a pitcher, like it sounds very simple. Oh, you're going to throw less. You're going to just go down there, and when we need you, you're just going to have to stay loose, and then you get ready and you go in, and now you get to air it all out for an inning or two, and boom, your stuff plays up. Everything's great. But like you said, there's a lot of routine in pitching, and we see it at the college level of coaching. It's a much different level. Obviously, it's very different, but a lot of pitchers don't know how to handle going down to the bullpen like they've always started. Or it's been like, okay, we're going to have you be the second in out of the pen today, or first out of the pen today, and you're going to try and finish the game. So they have a complete idea of when they're pitching. There's no surprise. There's no, hey, we need you to get ready now. That never happens. I think the only thing you have to fall back on here is what you mentioned. He did do it a little bit in Nashville, but even then in AAA, it's pretty planned out when you're going to go. It's not really like a, hey, we're getting into the 8th inning with a lead. This is going to be, we got to go to Miz now. He's going to shut us down for the last 2 innings. Like, it's pretty planned out. Like, hey, you're throwing today at some point. You're going to follow up somebody. It might not be exactly the inning you're going to go or exactly the time in the game, but there's no sitting down there and really just thinking, oh, I might be going today, especially for a guy like Miz. I would guarantee you they made it pretty clear to him last year when he was going to be going into games. So it's a big adjustment. And I think if they were going to do it, I think at some point, and we'll get to all the injuries, like, you might get to a point where you kind of feel like you need to try it because you just feel like you need a high leverage arm, and he is one of the guys who has the stuff to be capable of it. So I wonder how many injuries that takes, because I do think rather than opening, like, they may get to a point where they're down enough bullpen arms that they feel like he's one of the guys who could really get them big outs if things go well. So maybe if that happens, I could see that being the move for the Brewers, but I'm with you. And I said this in the DMs. I was talking to these people about, like, I think opener or extended opener, first pitcher in the game, even if it's 2-3 innings, whatever, first time through the order. I think that's the more realistic way to shorten his role in the playoffs and to shorten how often he's out there, how long he's out there. And I think it could be very effective, like you said. And I do think, I hadn't thought about it, but like, Priester has done it. He did it with Ashby and Hall a couple times throughout the season. He did it all the way back to Alexander a couple times. So he does seem like the guy who would be most comfortable doing it. And I think that would be a good match. I think that'd be something where you get a guy who throws, probably in a shorter stint, pretty consistently in the triple digits, with some nasty stuff, and then you get a guy who comes in and just tries to get a bunch of ground balls. And yeah, I could see that being a good combination, but it is tough. It's just not this easy, simple move. Put Jacob Misiorowski in the bullpen and let him go. Like, there's a lot more that goes into it than that. And I think that's probably the biggest point here. Like, it's not this really simple change for pitchers. It's actually a very, very different thing that they have to do day to day. It changes their entire routine, changes exactly what they need to do, especially for a starter moving to the pen. It changes, like, what days you're even up or down. Like, it's very different all across the board. And it's something that I think if they were going to do it, actually, they would probably need to do it very soon, because I don't think they're going to, but if they were going to, I don't think you could do it at the end of the season. It would be really tough to expect him to fit seamlessly into that role with no issues.
Back to the game action here. So Miz couldn't finish the 5th inning. Aaron Ashby came in and was able to clean it up. And from here on out, really the story of the game became the Brewers allowing the leadoff man to reach on a free base. So from the 5th inning through the 9th inning, every single one of those last 5 innings, the Brewers letting the leadoff man reach first base either through a walk or a hit by pitch. That was really the big deal. Nick Mears came in and he was tasked with working the 6th. Leadoff hit by pitch. Just not a great outing for him. Gave up 3 runs, 2 hits. Shelby Miller came in. Again, leadoff base runner. Didn't get an out. 2 runs scoring on his line. He left with an elbow injury. Pat Murphy saying post-game that he felt a pop, and we'll talk about it when we get to the injury section just because I don't want to keep interrupting the game action here. But the Brewers kept clawing back in this one. Isaac Collins hitting a 2-run single in the 8th to tie it at 8-8, and then Abner Uribe coming in, allowing a run for the first time in 19 appearances, giving up those final 2 for the Phillies to finish on top. A controversial inning. There were a couple of check swing calls that did not go the Brewers' way. Pat Murphy was very unhappy about those, and I can say it now on the podcast. I think he was right. I think the second one for sure on JT Realmuto, I do believe that was a swing, and the way that Murphy laid it out is what I would have said too. Like the bat head, when you freeze frame it, the bat head was in front of his front leg. Like that's very clearly a swing. When you're looking at it through that lens, though, at the same time, like I don't think that these are the kind of calls that you can get super upset about because I believe that these are probably the hardest call an umpire has to make because I'm not sure the human eye can actually see it in real time all that well, especially from the angle that those guys have down the baselines. Those are the angles they call it from because it's the best they have, but those are still not good angles to see where the bat's crossing the plane. And it happens so quick. A lot of times guys are going and then they're pulling back a little bit. There's like a recoil after the bat crosses the plane. It's just so hard to see. So I do think they got the call wrong here on Real Noodle, and Murphy did kind of acknowledge this post game. Like, that is not an easy call to make. Murphy even said, I might not get that right with my own eyes if I was in that situation. So I think this is an interesting one too, where I'm very curious to see how far the tech goes with calling these things, because I do think that using bat tracking for it, once the tech gets to that level, is probably the only way you're actually going to be able to call the swing or no swing very accurately or even remotely accurately.
Yeah, I'd echo everything you said. Like, I think they got it wrong, but I also honestly wasn't that upset that they got it wrong in the moment. Like, I fully understand why Murph would be. And in these types of scenarios, like Murph, for a right-handed hitter, probably has one of the best angles you could possibly have for this type of situation. And like you talked about, the base umpire has a much worse one. It, for those one, like, to me, that's a really 50-50 check swing for an umpire to make the call on. Like, yes, you freeze frame it, you see exactly where it is. Yes, it's a swing. And the weird part here is there's really no true definition of what a swing is. And that's what's going to make the bat tracking and what they end up doing with that, because I do think it's coming. And they've already tested some of this. Like, this is something they were able to challenge in the Arizona Fall League. And I think they do it in, it might be the American Associate. It's one of the independent ball leagues also has it. But what they do in that is that you have to go 45 degrees past the plane of the plate, basically. So it's like almost, it's a really, really big, it would be way past what an umpire usually calls a swing. In the current many were getting called when they challenged them in the Arizona Fall League. Again, there's no true definition of what a swing is for these things. Like, they don't have one. It's basically always been up for interpretation, and the idea has always been if it breaks the 90-degree, like even with the plane of the front of the plate, like if it goes beyond that, and or your wrist break or anything like that, but like that's always been the interpretation. But there's nothing that specifically calls that out in the rule book. So I think that would be the most interesting part to me, is like, do they go with what they've already been using for challenges? I think they should go. It can't be that wide. It's just way too much there. Like, that's almost a full swing, what they've been doing in the testing part of this right now. Like, it's going to have to be less than that, but I'll be curious how they handle that, because I don't know where they go with it. I think that you're right. That's the only way you can get it truly accurate. But I'm just going to be curious, because they're going to have to define a swing. If they're going to do that, they're going to have to define what a swing is and isn't, or it's not going to work, because then it's just, what's the point of it? Like, you have to define it if you're doing that. So That'll be the interesting part of it for me, because that's really never been written down or in writing anywhere. Like, it's just always been an interpretation from the umpires.
Brewers would bounce back in game 2, winning this one 6-3 over the Phillies. Jose Quintana delivering one of his better starts of the year, pitching into the 7th inning. 6 1/3 for him, 7 hits, 3 walks, 6 Ks, 3 earned runs. This was the one where really the damage coming on a home run. Weston Wilson hit one very, very far. And it did come in that 7th inning. So again, deep into the game, Jose Quintana, guys have seen him a couple times, and all of a sudden the 9-hitter takes him to the moon. So nothing surprising there. But I think you can make a case that this was kind of one of the situations where you did have to push it a little bit, seeing as before that home run, you had a fairly comfortable lead, knowing what the state of the bullpen was. I don't really have an issue with it, even though it did kind of end up forcing the leverage guys to pitch again. But all in all, pretty solid outing for Jose Quintana. A lot of balls on the ground, getting a couple choppers back to the mound as well. He had one inning where all 3 outs were recorded on ground balls right back to the mound, and each play was like progressively more difficult for him to make. So it was kind of funny to see that progression throughout the inning, but good stuff from him. On the offensive side, the Brewers getting off to a hot start with a 5-run first, Sal Frelick with a 2 RBI single, Isaac Collins with a 3-run homer, and then Turang adding that final run on an RBI double later in the ball game. Aaron Ashby once again pitching 2/3 to clean up that 7th inning for Quintana. Abner Uribe pitching in the 8th, Jared Koenig in the 9th for the save. I did like how Murphy did this one, kind of playing the matchup game a little bit more, and this is kind of what I was hoping he would do when Trevor McGill went down, instead of just only using Uribe in the 9th. I think that, yes, there is a lot of, I think, stability that probably comes, especially on the mental side of the game, from having like a 9th inning guy. I've kind of come to terms with the fact that there's probably a reason why every team still does it, even with all the information about matchups that we have out there now. But I also think that there's just a lot of flexibility that you can have when you don't tether anybody to a specific inning, including the 9th. So I like the way that he played this one, given where the score ended up at that stage, and it ended up working out for the Brewers.
Yeah, I'm with you. I liked how he did it too. When McGill went down, I was kind of hoping it'd be a little bit more closer by committee, and Abner stepped into it really well and done a really good job. So it's hard to complain. And like you said, I think there is a mental side to being the closer and being the guy that some people have and some people maybe struggle with a little bit more than others. But I mean, with this Phillies lineup, especially, and the way they have their middle of the order usually stacked with some pretty good lefties, like if you can set up a guy like Koenig, who does very well against lefties in general himself, against those guys, or at least make him the more likely to face that part of the order. Yeah, I like going about it that way. So I think this was a good way to handle it. They both obviously did a very good job and handled their inning cleanly. And yeah, it was Ashby pitching again, maybe not my favorite thing, but the other two, I liked how they handled the end of the game.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the benefit to using Koenig there in the 9th was it kept some of those lefties on the bench as well. Some of those guys who weren't in the
Yeah.
lineup against Quintana, and by rolling Koenig out there in kind of that pocket where you could have had some pinch hits, it worked out very nicely. So, we've ragged on Pat Murphy quite a bit, so I think you got to give him credit when he does line things up really well, like I think he did in this one. Game 2, arguably the best pitching performance for the Brewers in the series, but they would get shut out for the first time since July 22nd and drop the series finale by a score of 2-0. Kind of the B lineup out there a little bit for a day game after a night game. You had against the lefty Ranger Suarez too, who's been tough on left-handed hitters. So Murphy kind of taking that opportunity to give Brice Turang a day, gave Sal Frelick a day, Christian Yelich out for a second straight game. We'll talk about him in a few minutes. But 2-0 Phillies. This is a very Freddy start once again in this one. He went 5 shutout to extend his scoreless inning streak to 29, and he only gave up 2 hits and struck out 8. And somehow the pitch count was closing in on 100 pitches after the 5th inning, and that was a quick 5th inning too to finish things off. It looked like he might get up over 100. So 3 walks, a lot of deep counts, just kind of the same thing that we've talked about. So we won't go through the whole thing. And like you said, this is after this game, Murphy kind of, made the point of now you're talking about the distinction between someone who's been very good and someone who's a superstar. So, and Freddie acknowledged it too. Like he says he tries to work on this stuff and he's putting in the work, and I believe him too, because I don't think people fully realize like how dedicated he is to his craft behind the scenes. And I don't think he gets enough credit for being a very smart pitcher too. Like this is a guy who has really learned how to feel his way through an outing a little bit, how to sequence guys, how to use a fuller arsenal that he's developed, all those different kind of things. But bottom line, he gave the Brewers some more solid work in this one. The offense, meanwhile, went 0 for 10 with runners in scoring position in this one, stranded 8 men on base, including in the 6th inning when they had runners on second and third and nobody out. Caleb Durbin hit a soft ground out to second for the first out, couldn't get the runner in from third. Danny Jansen was trying to get one in the air. He said post-game he did. Unfortunately, it was too shallow to bring that runner in. And then Andrew Monasterio grounding out. I do want to touch on Jansen a little bit. I think that it seems like he's catching a lot of flack right now. I think he's another guy who's probably a better player than how he's performed so far. And to be clear, this is not like a Siegler situation where it's like the underlying stuff has been better. The underlying stuff so far for him has been just as bad as the results have been in Milwaukee. But this is a guy who has always been a competent offensive catcher, including for most of this year. And I really just wonder how much of this is a guy who's used to playing a little bit more regularly, kind of having to adapt to a new role where the at-bats have been a little bit more sporadic for him. So I think that he's getting a little bit of flack right now when I think he is a little bit better than this. Now, is that production actually going to improve if he's rarely playing? I don't know. But I think there's a better bat in there than he's getting credit for, and he's put in a lot of work on the receiving side too. I wrote a story about this last weekend. I'm not going to go through the whole, song and dance about it, but basically changing some stuff with the Brewers' guidance, with his setup, with the way he's doing his glove drop to try to frame low pitches. I'm not quite sure if it's actually working yet if you look at, pitch by pitch, but he's come in very open-minded, and he's definitely been willing to put in the work on some of that stuff. Will asked the question this week, is Jefferson Cairo being called up for a Danny Jansen DFA in the realm of possibility? Maybe, but I would still say that's rather unlikely.
I would say it's very unlikely. I think I get it. I really get it. And Cairo being on the 40 man makes it at least slightly more likely, I would say. Cairo, first of all, you'd be bringing up a rookie catcher who now has to learn the entire pitching staff. He has to learn how to work with these guys as you go down the stretch run of the season, potentially into the playoffs. You also lose depth by DFAing a guy like Jansen to bring up Cairo. And one thing Jack touched on that I feel like maybe I don't want to excuse it because it has been bad. There's no doubt about it. It's been bad. And like you said, Jack, there's really nothing backing it up and saying like in his time with the Brewers that it's all of a sudden going to get better. But this is a guy who was he was starting pretty regularly for the Rays. This is a guy who's now coming in, playing once a week-ish, not playing very often. I think there is something to completely changing again, we talked about the pitchers. There's a routine you have when you're an everyday guy versus a bench player, learning how to do that. It even reminds me a little bit of like when Yelich became more of a full-time DH and learning how to navigate a game when you're not in the field regularly and you're not doing certain things throughout a game that you're very used to doing. And Jansen is going through that right now, and it has not been good. Like that, there's just no way around it. It's been very bad when he's been out there, especially offensively. It has just there's not been much good. He blocks the ball really well on defense. That's continued, but that's really only the good thing you've seen from him defensively as well. You talked about it. He's making changes in the framing, and go read the article. Go read Jack's article on that, because it does go into what he's specifically working on. And honestly, you can watch games when he's catching and you can see what he's working on now if you do that. But it's been bad. That said, I just think there's one, if Contreras were to get hurt, I would want Jansen to be the starting catcher over other people, like over Haas, over Cairo. I would rather have Danny Jansen be the everyday starting catcher, someone who's used to that role, somebody who's done it a lot, and somebody who has shown he can perform in that role. I would rather that be the case. And two, this is still a very small sample with the Brewers for Jansen. I'm not that concerned about it. I think there will be something that comes around a little bit as we finish out the season, but to bring it back to Cairo, that's a lot to put on a rookie's shoulders in that moment. You can do it at other positions and feel a little better about it, but at the catcher spot, they have so much beyond just, hey, go perform, that they have to worry about when they come up. That's a lot for them to have to try and figure out in the last 3 to 4 weeks of the regular season, and then potentially as the backup catcher in the playoffs. It's just a lot to put on his plate. And everything we've heard about him from Rick Sweet, from lower level coaches, from all the way back in the DSL, if anyone can handle that stuff, it is Cairo. He is said to be just unbelievably good at working with the pitching staff. He picks things up quickly. He's very good at the stuff. And I still would be worried about it, because that is just a lot to ask out of a rookie catcher, even in a backup role. And again, for him, I think the same thing would hold true for him. He hasn't been a backup. He hasn't played that role where he's going out there and only going out and playing once a week at any point in his career. So that's going to be a big adjustment for a guy like him too. I think you're more likely to end up with a similar situation, and maybe even hampering the development of a guy who's still coming off injury, who's still got some work to do on certain things in the minors. I don't know that it helps the Brewers or Cairo is really my main point here. And I don't think the Brewers make a move that could potentially be bad for both sides of the equation there, just to try and upgrade the backup catcher spot a little bit if things break right.
I also want to touch on, I think a lot of people, more so than Cairo, what I've seen is people wondering why did the Brewers replace Eric Haas with Danny Jansen? Because Eric Haas seemingly doing a perfectly adequate job in that backup role, or people saying Eric Haas could have done better than this. So Jansen has what, a 500 something OPS since the Brewers traded for him in 10-ish games, or it might be 13 games or something. I think everybody's overlooking the fact that while Eric Haas, I think, is a much better receiver than Danny Jansen is, with the pitch framing, on the offensive side, that's what I think a lot of people are worried about. That's what people are having an issue with. I think everybody's just glossing over the fact that Eric Haas had a 40% strikeout rate when the Brewers DFA'd him, and he had a 35% strikeout rate the year before. You can look at his entire career. It has always been high swing and miss, never walking. That's not a recipe for success. And I mean, we've spoken very highly of Eric Haas on this show, total professional. I'm still very impressed with the way that he really developed his receiving, because he was not a good framer when the Brewers picked him up. They made a lot of changes and he became pretty solid at receiving and framing pitches. I also still think that he called one of the best games out of the catchers that the Brewers have had back there in recent years. But if everybody's upset about the offense, I don't think enough people are realizing if the Brewers kept Eric Haas, he probably would have been hitting very similarly to how Danny Jansen has hit since he joined the Brewers. The 40% strikeout rate, I think it was already starting to fall apart for Haas. If you look at how he performed in the first month of the year compared to the last couple of weeks leading up to the DFA. And I think it was only going to get worse, because there are still some very big holes in that swing. A lot of swing and miss there. Again, I would have been okay with keeping him as the backup because he's not up here to hit. And like I said, he's good veteran presence in the clubhouse, receives, I think, better than he used to, better than Jansen does even right now. But knowing how much the Brewers really, at the time especially, could have used a little bit of a power boost. I don't think it was the craziest move in the world to say, hey, Danny Jansen might give us an edge here over Eric Haas in a couple of areas where we could use it. So, I think it still made sense to do what they did, and I think a lot of people are overlooking the fact that I don't think bringing in Jansen really made anything worse at all. Like, I think if this is the worst case scenario for how it was going to play out, this really is not that bad, because I think he's still hitting at the rate Eric Haas would have hit anyway. Probably the biggest thing you can point to is the backup catcher receiving taking a hit, because I do think there have been some moments where he's not getting that close call at the bottom of the zone. Even on Thursday, it was pretty hit or miss, like whether he was actually sticking that pitch at the bottom and getting the call there. He had a couple of nice ones and then a couple where he wasn't getting it, things like that. But to me, I do think it's being blown a little bit further out of proportion than how big of a deal it really is.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think this is, well, just, I mean, this year Haas had a 647 OPS for the Brewers in his time in the big leagues. Like, yes, Jansen's is 565, but I think we're splitting hairs on if we're caring too much about offensive production from the backup catcher spot. And it's like you said, I think the logic here was very reasonable from the Brewers side of things. Like, they saw a guy who, one, has hit lefties well in general, and also has shown an ability to hit the ball in the air for some power to the pulse. The Brewers, especially at the deadline, were not showing a ton of power. I think they've showed more power since that time, and ironically, none of it has involved Danny Jansen. But it's something that, like, they had an ability to potentially add some pop to it. I think they thought they could work on some of the receiving stuff, and they are. And I think you might see that play out a little bit more as this month progresses. As he gets more reps, gets more comfortable doing it, it might look a little bit better, but it hasn't been good. I get why people aren't thrilled with Danny Jansen, but I'm with you in saying, like, I liked Eric Haas. I still like Eric Haas. Eric Haas is a great third option to have in AAA right now. If one of them does get hurt at the big league level, and the fact that he stayed in the organization, that's a positive for the Brewers. But I have no issue with taking the shot on Jansen and saying, hey, this could upgrade this spot. It could even give us other options in pinch hitting. It could give us other options in ways that we can kind of maneuver the roster and lineup. And it hasn't worked out so far. And that's okay. It wasn't a huge, it was pretty low risk in terms of the trade itself, and there was some decent upside. And so far, we're not seeing a ton of that upside. But it also can be, I think, as you get down the stretch of a season, sometimes a little hot streak from a guy, and all of a sudden things turn around quite a bit for a deadline acquisition. So you never know. If the bat gets going a little bit, people could start looking at it quite a bit differently, I think.
Another moment in this game that we got asked about was an Alec Bohm triple off of Tobias Myers later in the ball game. Isaac Collins was playing right field in this one. Made a dive attempt, didn't get there. The route was not good. If you go back and watch the video, and that set up a base hit, a bloop single by Trey Turner. Really nice piece of hitting, actually, on a low splitter. Just kind of dunked it over the head of the shortstop. I talked to you. This was a count where I was kind of hoping they would go slider, because it seemed like he was in between on fastball and splitter, and those are both pitches that are coming into you. So I thought maybe if you go out with a slider, you might have a better chance of kind of getting something off the end, or getting maybe a swing and a miss there. But bottom line, it was a pitch it was a splitter executed well, and he just hit it. But the focus here was the ball that Collins played into a triple to really set that up. So Lucas asked, is Isaac Collins' defensive regression concerning? He's not getting good jumps anymore, and he put up -3 fielding run value in August. And he had a bad jump and dive on what ultimately led to the winning run on Thursday. I think you have to be a little bit careful with month-by-month defensive splits, um, especially for the outfield. I feel like that's a big one too, because I could see it a little more for infield, maybe, like if you're changing something with your footwork getting a lot better, and you're getting to more balls that way. But There have been more plays, I think, in the last month or so where you've noticed like Isaac Collins has not played the ball great. I would also like to see I haven't looked into this. I'd like to see kind of the breakdown of how it looks in right because he's played a little bit more right field lately. And I feel like that's where a lot of the issues have been. That leads into our next question from Kevin. He says, my eyes tell me that Isaac Collins is uncomfortable and not as good in right field as in left. What do your collective eyes and the limited sample size numbers say? So he is at -1 outs above average in right field so far in that very small sample. But again, I don't know if you can really look at numbers when it's that small of a sample. But yeah, my eye is telling me too that he just doesn't have the same read on the ball this year. But the other thing to point out here is like Collins has never graded out well in the route department. It's always been the jumps. So, if there is something going on where he's not getting the good jumps anymore, it is going to fall apart pretty quickly. And that's where maybe you start to wonder about. I know he had kind of the back thing after he came off of the paternity list, and maybe you wonder if that's something that's still bothering him. Is there some kind of thing going on that's preventing him from having that really good first couple of steps? That's kind of what I would maybe point to as where the difference is coming in. And I have a hard time believing that like the first step, once it's gone for good for some reason. So maybe it is just kind of a health thing or something's not quite right where that first couple steps isn't as sharp as it was early in the year. So hopefully he gets that back. But I'm not super concerned about it yet. I think it's something to monitor. We just got to kind of see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think it is a little concerning, and I think everything you laid out there, there could be other reasons that some of this has fallen apart a little bit this month, and he had a down month. I shouldn't say fallen apart, but he had a down month in August. Um, I agree though that especially the advanced defensive stats and everything, you get too small sample size, and it's just only accounting for, two bad plays can really tank it in a small sample where it really doesn't look that bad in the long haul over the course of a season. And so it can be a little tricky to navigate when you're trying to get too small sample with it. But to answer Kevin's part of it, when I watch him, he does not look as comfortable and right. He hasn't at any point this season. I think he's only played 8 games out there total, but like you said, a few of them have come more recently. They want to put Churio in left, and when Perkins is playing, he's going to be in center, and that's get free like a day off. And now you've got Collins and right, and I don't think he's as comfortable over there. But even in left, a lot of the numbers have gone down since kind of that end of July for the season. The numbers have gone down since that end of July point. I also wonder, and this is more just a thought that popped into my head while we were talking here, left field at AmFam can be tricky, and I just wonder how much, Sun can play a role in jumps, especially not seeing the ball well off the bat. Those panels start getting in the way. Different time of year causes different areas for the sun to be in different parts of the game. I can't help but wonder if some of it is playing left field at American Family Field and having to deal with those panels, because a lot of left fielders have said that it's one of the more uncomfortable places to play, especially at certain times in the game, because it's just very bright coming through those window panels. And I just wonder if there's been a little bit more of that, if he's had more balls hit to him during that. I don't think it's something that you lose. I do think a back problem, if it is kind of nagging, could cause some issues with jumps. I think there's a little less twitch when your back is stiff or uncomfortable, and you don't have that quick movement off the jump all the time. So some of that could be playing in. But yeah, I mean, it didn't look great. It especially didn't look great in right. I think I want to see it a little bit longer and see if the jumps kind of start to get back into form. But I would say that the trend is a little concerning. I mean, it could be an issue if he turns out to just really regress in the defensive department. But I'm not convinced that's going to be the case.
Yeah, we'll just have to kind of see how it unfolds moving forward. We should finally get to some injury updates here. So we'll start with Shelby Miller. He was the big one. He came out of that game earlier in the series, like we mentioned, felt a pop in his elbow. That's never a good sign. And then it came out the next day. He's got a UCL sprain, so he's done for the season, likely getting a full Tommy John, which would sideline him for all of next year. And then he has to decide, does he want to make a comeback attempt at 36 years old? And those are all decisions that he is going to have to make with input from his family over the next several months. So it's a blow to the Brewers, who have been weathering some injuries in their bullpen. And, we had talked about this before, like Shelby Miller was hopefully, at least in our view, a guy who, he's a rental. He's pitched a little bit less than some of these other guys. This is the guy that hopefully you can ride a little bit more down the stretch and into October. And now obviously Pat Murphy's not going to have the ability to do that because he's not healthy. I do think this kind of raises an interesting discussion about the way the Brewers have approached some of their pitching acquisitions lately. We don't criticize this front office a ton, but I do think it's fair to start asking some questions about the number of guys that they've brought in for this season who had very recent arm, elbow issues on their records and who ended up pretty quickly suffering a serious arm injury after they started pitching for the Brewers. Mr. Cortez had elbow issues last year with the Yankees, and after 2 starts with the Brewers, flexor strain knocks him out for half the year. He doesn't pitch for the Brewers again. Connor Thomas came to the Brewers as a Rule 5 pick. Pat Murphy made kind of a vague comment at one point about how they knew there was some kind of existing issue there. And then he ended up undergoing surgery to get bone spurs removed and get a UCL repair. So now the Brewers are kind of in limbo with what are they going to do with him, especially with a lot of those Rule 5 roster restriction rules that come with those kind of picks. And now you add Shelby Miller to the mix, a guy who was on the IL with a forearm strain when the Brewers traded for him. And then Miller did add the tidbit as well when he talked to the media after the injury that some form of UCL operation was on the table when he was sidelined with that forearm strain in Arizona. And forearm strains are often a precursor to a more severe UCL injury. And, he was rehabbing at the time, so good enough to come back. But this is something that the Brewers presumably knew about. And, he comes in and sure enough, the elbow gives out, and now he's got a UCL sprain and he's likely needing Tommy John. So I do think it's fair to at least ask the question of, are the Brewers actually doing this the right way by bringing in guys who have those recent elbow injuries? Or maybe the better question is, are the Brewers actually doing a good job of diagnosing the amount of risk that comes with that guy's health when you bring him in? Because so far, they are 0 for 3. And as much as I like the process of a lot of things behind the Shelby Miller deal, especially because at the end of the day, too, they didn't really give anything up. I mean, they took Jordan Montgomery's contract. So part of it's like similar with Jansen, too. Like, this is a move where even if it didn't work, it's not like there was really a whole lot of risk here. So I think that's something you need to consider, too. But just the fact that they've now gone 0 for 3 on bringing in guys who seemingly did not have the cleanest bill of elbow health, and all 3 of their elbows ran into serious issues pretty quickly. That's not a very good reflection on the Brewers and on their staff for how they're, whatever you want to call it, diagnosing this, projecting the risk here. Like, I don't know what the best term is for it, but I do think it is fair to start criticizing them a little bit for this, or at least asking the question of, do they maybe need to change the way that they're going about this kind of thing specifically?
Yeah, I think the question is basically, are they vetting this correctly? Are they treating the potential risk correctly? Like you said, I think that's really how you're looking at it. And for Shelby Miller and Thomas, like, to me, yeah, I think that's fine. Like, those are deals you just mentioned. There was very little risk in the Shelby Miller deal. So I'm guessing they kind of knew this was a possibility, and that's why they basically worked out a deal where if it happened, they'll be okay. They're not giving up much to do it. Now the argument could be made that they maybe should have done something more certain, or where there was a lot less likelihood of an injury on the bullpen side of things at the deadline as well, then that they should have made a second deal, or they should have made that deal instead of the Shelby Miller deal. I think that's probably the bigger question there. And I think you could make that argument for sure. The Rule 5 thing with Connor Thomas, like they could let him go anytime and let him go back to St. Louis if they want to, if they need that 40-man spot in the offseason, if they need it at any point. Like, to me, that one's not very high risk either. But I think when you look at it, especially with Nestor, like, that was supposed to be a decently big part of that Devin Williams trade. And luckily for the Brewers, I think, for at least in terms of how fans are viewing it, and maybe people around baseball are viewing the trade, Durbin has really picked things up, and he's overall been a very solid player this year. And Devin Williams has struggled quite a bit in New York. So I think the Brewers aren't going to get much flack for this trade no matter what, with how Devin has performed in New York this season. But that one, like, that was a big piece of a trade. That was it, trading away a very important part of your team. And it took 2 starts before this was a major issue. So I think your point is very fair. Like, you can't do this all the time. If my guess is they're viewing it as like a risk reward, that they feel like they're getting better value for these guys, and that if they stay healthy, they get really good value out of them because of that. And the teams that are moving on from them or trading them are doing it because they think there is a decent chance, and the Brewers are kind of weighing that risk and trying to get the best value out of it. But it's not working. It's just not. Like, this is 3 in one season, and I can't think of an example of a time that it really has worked. I think you could even go back to signing Wade Miley before last season. Like, they knew there were elbow issues for that one too when they made that signing, that was a potential issue for him, and it flared up very quickly after he got to the team. Am I mixing? That was last season that they signed Miley back, right? Or was it 2 years ago?
It was last season
together in my head, but I think that was last
he signed
year,
back
right?
the first time. He signed back the first time, and he was okay.
Okay.
And then they brought him back for like the second year of that reunion, and that's when he didn't get very far. He had been pitching with like the bone spurs in the elbow for a very, very long time, though.
Right. So I guess you could argue that one actually did work out for a while, because they got one good season out of it, but that they knew it was a risk, and they took that risk on again, and then it didn't work out in 2024. So just another example, I guess, a little bit of like, they're willing to take those risks. I guess the question then becomes, is that a worthwhile venture for them to continue doing? Because it hasn't been a high hit rate. They haven't gotten a lot of value out of it, really. Yeah, I think it's fair to question it. I really don't know the answer. I'm throwing more questions out than giving any actual answer. But it definitely is not working right now, and I think it is definitely fair to question it.
Couple more bullpen updates. Trevor McGill threw his bullpen session on Thursday. Everything went off without a hitch, so they're still thinking that a minimum stint on the IL is in play for that mild flexor strain that he's battling. That'd be a big return, obviously, for the Brewers bullpen, especially because Pat Murphy said post-game on Thursday, right after sharing that McGill update, that the Brewers are going to have another pretty significant reliever going on the IL before the Pittsburgh series. Murphy wouldn't name who it was because I think they're kind of in the process of figuring out the corresponding moves and all that kind of stuff. But you can do a little bit of process of elimination here. So Murphy said it was an injury that was not sustained on Thursday. It was already something that was kind of going on, and they got a further diagnosis of it on Thursday. So looking at the guys who pitched in that game, Myers pitched, Piamps pitched, Koenig and Uribe warmed up. You had most of the bullpen was in the game. You can kind of do the process of elimination for who did not pitch and who is not getting loose. That narrows the options down to a couple of guys. So I'm not going to speculate publicly because I think in my position that would probably be a little bit irresponsible. But you guys can do the math for yourselves and kind of figure out who this might be. We'll find out for sure on Friday, though, likely ahead of that series. Grant Anderson, he's scheduled to begin a minor league rehab assignment, scheduled to throw 1 inning over the weekend in AAA Nashville. So someone who the Brewers could be getting back pretty soon, especially kind of a rubber-armed guy in that bullpen. Be nice to have him back just to eat some innings. Robert Gasser, his next rehab outing, he threw 5 innings on August 29th, and after that point, the Brewers shifted him to a relief role, so he's going to be pitching in more of that capacity. Spencer's pointing to himself because he put last week's update on the agenda, but I caught it as I was talking because I'm really, really good at this. But he's prepping to pitch out of the bullpen now, so we'll see if he ends up being the corresponding move as part of that whole series of transactions that we'll see before the Pirates series. Another left-hander, DL Hall. He's beginning plyometric work as we speak, and there is potential, per the Brewers, for a late September return. Sounds like it's kind of up in the air right now. We'll see what happens there. Logan Henderson, he was moved to the 60-day IL. That ended his hopes of playing or pitching, I should say, in the regular season again, but it sounds like he's still an option for October in the postseason. He's playing catch at 90 feet right now, and we'll kind of see where things go from there. So he still is on the table for October. We'll see how that all shakes out. Some potentially interesting decisions for the Brewers there. Switching over to the position player side, Christian Yelich sat out the last 2 games with a back flare-up. It was the first time that he's had any issues with that back that we know of since he had the surgery on it last year. He's actually been very durable for the most part here in 2025. Right now, it sounds like the Brewers are still expecting him to be back in the lineup on Friday, so it would only be a 2-game absence for him. For the Brewers' sake, I'm sure you're hoping that it's nothing more than that, especially as we kind of talked about kind of the state of the outfield right now. And then finally, Rhys Hoskins. He's still in Nashville on a rehab assignment. Things have looked pretty good down there so far, but the Brewers have been non-committal on when he's going to come back. I'll share a quote from Murph earlier this week via Adam McCalvey. There isn't a target date. We just feel like with our roster, the way it is right now, he's a first baseman and a DH. We have both of those positions right now, and we have the opposite-handed, left-handed hitter for pinch hit situations, talking about Jake Bauers there. So to thread the needle, we still feel like we need a little more time with Jackson Churrio's health and the youth on the infield. We need a little more time to see how that's all going to fall. The 9th is the last day of his rehab assignment. So I think a lot of what's really going on here, you can kind of boil this down to, this is the Brewers doing what they always do. They stretch out these roster crunch decisions, kick that can as far down the line as possible, because they want to keep as many guys for as long as they can, just so that they're shielded with some depth in case something happens. So I would imagine that we're probably going to see them use the full extent of that rehab clock to push that decision as far down as they can. And then they make a call on kind of what do they want to do. Do they want to carry 3 first basemen and option Anthony Siegler, for example? Do you decide that you're just going to cut bait with Jake Bauers and you're going to roll with Rhys Hoskins and Andrew Vaughn as your 2 first basemen? Or do you go extreme and option Andrew Vaughn? I don't know that one's really on the table considering how he's performed, but there's a lot going on right now, and there's always a chance that somebody gets hurt in the next 5 days, and then that kind of alleviates that logjam anyway. So this is how the Brewers have always done these things, so I don't think it's especially surprising.
No, it's not surprising, and it's been good to see Hoskins performing pretty well in AAA. I've been able to watch some of it. He definitely looks like he's moving well, and well, for Rhys Hoskins standards, he's moving well. But yeah, this is how they do things. This is a stretch it out, make sure that the depth is there in case there is an injury or in case something happens. Like it would be awful to DFA Jake Bauers tomorrow and then Andrew Vaughn to get hurt in Pittsburgh. Like that's what they're trying to avoid. They want to have this so that they can stretch it out until they're absolutely sure nothing else is going to happen. And then, they get to a point where they don't have a choice and you have to make a decision. And then something could happen after that. But this is just extending that time period, seeing what they can wait out, seeing if anything bad happens. Obviously not rooting for that, but understanding that it can. And this is how they handle stuff. And unless you are absolutely going to step back in, like if Christian Yelich was in this situation, Christian Yelich would not be waiting out a rehab assignment right now. Christian Yelich would be slotting directly back in to the DH role. But because of how Vaughn's performed, they don't see that as like an immediate, yep, we need Rhys Hoskins to go back in and play first base right now so they can afford to wait it out. So they're going to.
Exactly. That's really all there is to it. A couple of listener questions that we got this week, just general stuff from a couple of people. We'll start with Nick, who asks, question for Jack. That's me. Has being in the press box / interviews had any impact on your perspective of the Brewers or baseball in general? Do you find yourself watching the game or approaching your analysis from a different point of view than before? This is a really good question. Thank you for sending it in. I think the biggest difference is that when you're talking to these guys, I think you learn to understand the human side of it a little bit more. Not that I ever had my head buried into the sand to the point where I completely ignored something like that, but I think you grow to appreciate the day-to-day grind that these guys put themselves through and the human side of the whole thing. I think it also just kind of reminds you, like, they're people. Like, I think being on the outside, it's very easy to, I'm not going to say not see them as people, but like they're guys who you only see through your TV screen, or if you're in the stands, you're seeing them kind of from a distance. But to actually be up close and talk to some of them, like you get a feel for each guy's personality a little bit more. Then again, you kind of respect the work that they put in, and you grow to respect the human side of the game a little bit more. As far as my perspective of like the game on the field, my analysis, I think I've gotten a little bit of a better understanding of what players value and what coaches value and that kind of stuff. Nobody's ever going to be completely transparent about that, especially on the record, for obvious reasons. Guys are not going to want to give away their most important secrets, but I think you kind of get a sense a little more of, okay, this is the kind of stuff that they seem to emphasize, and I think you can kind of follow that thread a little bit better and know what kind of questions you need to ask guys. You can just kind of go into an interview or go into a conversation with someone having at least more of a firm understanding of, okay, this is the kind of stuff that they might want to talk about. This is the kind of stuff that they seem to value. So this is kind of more what I should ask about or how I should ask something. Those are probably the biggest ones. Maybe I'm kind of talking in circles a little bit, but hopefully that's an answer that gives you a little bit of insight on maybe how it impacts the way I look at the game. But by and large, too, like the cool part of it has also just been going in and the instances where I do have an intuition about something and I talk to a guy and a lot of the stuff that I hear kind of backs it up. So that's kind of cool too. But there's also been just as many, if not more, moments where maybe I have a thought on something and I talk to someone and it's like, well, maybe I was kind of close, but not really. And now I kind of have a better understanding of how this actually works. And you can kind of go from there. So it's been an awesome experience. Like, I always want to continue being a student of the game, no matter what capacity I'm involved in baseball in. I think that's a trait and an attribute and an approach that you always need to have. Like, even the top baseball thinkers are going to tell you that they want to keep learning more things about baseball or hearing different perspectives about baseball. Like, this game has so much to offer, and what I've always loved about it too is like how complex this game can be, how many different ways you can dissect something. Like, there's always more to learn, and there's no better place to be learning than a big league clubhouse, getting to talk to a lot of these guys. So yeah, I don't talk about it a lot, but it really is a super cool opportunity that I'm super grateful for. Like, I know there's a lot of people who would give anything to be doing this, and I'm very privileged to get to do it in the capacity that I do it. So, yeah, hopefully that answers that question. But thank you for asking. Thought Spencer might have a reaction to that, but he doesn't. So I'll go to the next question. Uh, Jackson asks, how much regression do you see with Brice
It's
Turang
great.
for the rest of the season and into the playoffs? He's on another planet right now. While I think he will continue to show power, regression to some degree will most likely happen. Obviously, he's not going to hit for a 200 WRC plus the rest of the way, but I think that the power is pretty legit. Like we've talked about this before. This is not, he's not running into some kind of temporary hot streak. It's not going to continue, at a 10 home run a month pace, but I would guess that there's still a pretty good chance that he's a solidly above average bat the rest of the way and someone who is capable very much so of a big swing in a spot where the Brewers might need it.
You mean he's not going to stay on a 60 homer? This is ridiculous. I don't buy that for a second. No, but I'm with you. Like this is real stuff. Like these are real changes. These are real improvements. He's going to continue to be a solid hitter. But it's not going to stay at this level that it was in August because hardly anyone in baseball ever hits as well as he did in August. Even the best of the best in their best months to match that type of production. It was one of the better months we've seen in a long time for the Brewers. And yeah, I mean, I expect there to be some homers. I think it's incredible. I think there's a very good chance of him getting to 20 homes this year, which is just very, very hard to believe. But yeah, no, this is real improvements. These are real improvements. These are things that he unbelievable if even close to matching to August in September.
He also asked for a separate question. Who would you rather play in the NLDS if you're the Brewers, the Cubs or the Padres? Please give a few reasons why. If I'm the Brewers, I would much rather face the Padres. And for me, the biggest reason is, and we may have touched on this in the past, I think the Cubs are the team that is built to beat the kind of baseball that the Brewers play. We've talked about this before, like the pressure offense, putting the ball in play, forcing the opponent to make plays. The Cubs are the team that is going to respond to that, and we've seen them respond to that if you look back to that Wrigley series. So there, for all the talk about like the Brewers being a very, very good defensive team, which they are, the Cubs are right there with them. In fact, they're better in some measures. The Cubs are second in baseball with 75 defensive runs saved, and they're sixth in baseball with 22 outs above average. They're first in baseball with a 36 fielding run value. Like this is an elite defensive team, and they've got really good defenders all over the place. Like Nico Horner could have been a Gold Glove shortstop. He's playing second base because Dansby Swanson is at shortstop, and he's an elite defensive shortstop. Matt Shaw can pick it pretty good over at third base. Michael Busch is no slouch at first because he used to be a third baseman / second baseman, so he's got good hands over there. PCA is really, really good in center field, arguably the best defensive center fielder in baseball this year. Like, they have guys who can pick it and can run down balls, and they are going to respond to the Brewers just kind of poking the ball around in play. They can handle that. So to me, that's the team that is very capable of going into a playoff series with the Brewers, and the Brewers do their pressure thing where it's like work some walks, put the ball in play, try to force some misplays, do different things like that. And the Cubs are just going to answer the bell and they're going to make all the plays. And if the Brewers don't get that big swing, then they're in trouble at that point. So the Padres, meanwhile, they've got some scary arms in that bullpen. I think that's the biggest thing they have going for them. The offense hasn't been amazing for them. It's been fine. It's been solid, but not anything world beating. And then the defense has been largely unremarkable. Like they're not a crazy good defensive team. So to me, the Cubs are the team that I would be feeling a lot more trepidation about facing, because I think those are the guys that are built to beat the kind of baseball that the Brewers have played that has led them to a lot of wins this year.
Yep. For me, the Padres are a relatively easy choice between the two of them, and I hate making that choice because I just know whoever I choose that I would prefer to play is who the Brewers will play, and then I will be scared that I'm jinxing it. But for me, it's the Padres, and even just talking about the offense, like they've slugged less than the Brewers this year. Like they have not slugged much. This is not. It's a team that you would think. You look at their roster; they've got Tatis, they've got Machado in the middle of their lineup. Like you would think there's a lot of slug there, and there hasn't been this year. So we talk about that as something that would worry us a bit about the Brewers, but that same issue would be there for the Padres. Like you said, the back of their bullpen could be really, really good. I mean, they've got some very talented arms, but the defense is not at the level of the Cubs. It's not even close. And I think that's always going to be the biggest difference when you look at it. And then, yeah, I mean, I would rather face the Padres offense than the Cubs offense as well. So this is, for me, it's the Padres. And yeah, yeah, if that ends up biting me in the butt, I don't care. That's the true answer to that question for me, and that's what I'm going to do.
Corey asked us again, what are we doing with Anthony Siegler? Guy can't hit or field. Does he have some dirt on Murphy? We talked about this, so go listen to last week's show. I'm not going to revisit the whole song and dance. Lance did ask kind of a follow-up off of that, though, based on some more recent news. Could we see Luis Urias replace Siegler on the roster? I have nothing against Siegler. It just isn't working out for him. So the Brewers did reunite with old friend Luis Urias on a minor league deal. But I'm going to say this is unlikely because you would need to add Luis Urias to the 40-man roster.
Yeah, unless they have like a 60-man somebody they can put on the 60-day in the near future. I just don't see them really adding anybody to the 40-man. So I'm with you on that. And yeah, I mean, you know what's funny is I was looking at Urias and he's like basically the same age as Isaac Collins. So it's very funny when you look at it that way. Like Collins is a rookie doing a lot of really good things. Urias, it feels like his career's kind of passed him by, and they're basically the same age. So yeah, I mean, first of all, I've got no problem adding Urias back into the organization. He showed good things at times in his major league career. I think giving him an opportunity in Nashville to see if they can work on some things. If he's showing a lot of stuff they like, I mean, I wouldn't completely rule out the possibility of him taking the spot of a guy like Siegler, but I would guess not. And we're not going to do the whole Siegler thing, but I do just want to say, like, I do personally, watching him right now, like I think the process is getting a little worse. There are things I'm seeing that I'm not liking as much. So I wouldn't be shocked if things don't work out this year right now. I'm feeling a little bit worse about how he's playing, how he's kind of looked out there. He looks a little more uncomfortable. He looks a little less confident, and the process is getting worse. He's chasing a little more. He's whiffing more. Like there are things that aren't going well, and I'm not going to just sit here and back a guy no matter what. Like that, I'm seeing a different process now, and that has to be called out too. But yeah, I still think there's going to be a little more time before they give up on Siegler, and I don't know that Urias would be the answer to that at any rate.
I think when you're talking about like the guys who are underperforming what the process is saying they should be experiencing for results, it always gets tricky because you can talk about, okay, in theory, if he keeps doing these things, the results should follow. But you know, the saying is this game is 90% mental, and when guys are not getting results, especially your first stint in the big leagues, like that can wear on a guy. And I'm not saying that's for sure what's happening with him, but the moment you do start to see some things like he's chasing a little more, he's whiffing a little bit more at some borderline pitches, and he's making a couple misplays now at third base, like you do start to wonder, is one thing kind of bleeding into the next? And then once you do get to that point, then you know, you do have to have that discussion about, okay, maybe he really just does need kind of like a clean break and you start fresh next year. But the reality does still remain for me. Like his overall profile, the things that he is capable of doing, he's a guy who deserves some opportunities, and I'm glad that the Brewers are giving them to them. I think that's the right call. I think they're handling it the right way too, where it's like you're trying to get him playing time against the right-handed pitchers who you think he's going to stack up well against. You're not going straight platoon with Durbin. You're kind of trying to play that balance of getting this guy some opportunities, because you've got a pretty good reason to believe that in the long run he's going to project better than Durbin in some of these matchups. But yeah, it's just a matter of like you got to keep watching the process and see where that's at, and kind of go from there. So we'll see how it all shakes out for him. Speaking of development and process and all of this good stuff, it's now time for Spencer's minor league sandbox. And you've got a couple of questions that you got this week to lead off this segment. So also looks like you have a decent number of notes too. And I know you have a tendency to go very detailed on these notes. So without further ado, I'll let you jump into it.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll extend this. Don't you worry. Like Jack said, we do have a couple questions for this one. So the first one comes from Nick. He said, question for Spencer, looking ahead to next year, which prospects do you think are most likely to make their debut in 2026? And which of these prospects do you actually expect to be significant contributors? So it's a good question. It's, for me, the almost certainty, as long as he's healthy, is Jefferson Cairo. We talked about him before. I don't really expect him to come up this year, but I do think you're going to see him next year, and I think it could be on opening day. I think it's pretty likely he's the backup catcher on opening day, and not really in the backup role that they're currently using their backups. I think it would be in more of there'd be more regular playing time for him in that role than what you've seen from Haas and Jansen. He's like the near certainty one for me. I think Coleman Crow, assuming his injury isn't too bad, the one he's dealing with right now, I think there's a pretty decent chance you see him making appearances next year, whether it's as a starter, whether it's out of the bullpen. I think there's a pretty good chance you see him in the big leagues at some point next year. And then I think Brock Wilken is in the big leagues next year. I think that's the other one I'm comfortable saying. Like I think there's a pretty good chance we see Brock Wilken next year. And he's come back from his injury. I'm going to talk about him a little bit during the actual sandbox portion here, but he's come back. He's playing. He's healthy again. I'm curious if he'll go to the AFL for a second straight year. My guess is not, but he's going to be in big league spring training, I would imagine. And as good as Durbin's been, and we've talked about Siegler, like the upside of Wilken surpasses any of those guys by a decent amount. And he was having a very, very good season in an extremely tough hitting environment in Double-A. I don't think he makes the team out of spring, but I think there's a pretty good chance we see him before the All-Star break next year. I guess that's my prediction there. And then other than that, I mean, I wouldn't rule out Cooper Pratt. I wouldn't rule out Luke Adams. I wouldn't rule out Blake Burke. All of those guys, I think, would have a shot at some point making an impact on next year's team. But the three I named first are kind of the ones I would be most inclined to believe will make their debut next year. So hopefully that answers that question. And then in terms of significant contributions, I think if any of them do, I think Wilken would probably would have the chance to make the biggest contribution. Cairo, I talked about it. I think he'll play, but I don't think it's going to be enough where he's making a huge impact. And unless there are starting rotation injuries, I'm not sure Crow is actually like a true starter in the big leagues for an extended period of time. So my guess is he's not making a huge impact out of the pen or as a spot starter. But I think Wilken would have the possibility to step into kind of a big power role and add some of that pop that we've talked about a lot that the Brewers could always use. So he would be my answer for that one. Steve asked, at what point would the Brewers promote Made without promoting Pena at the same time? He says, I know they are a support team for each other, which I'm sure is super valuable to each of them, but they both may not be ready for a promotion at the same time. How did the Brewers handle that? It's a good question. my guess is, unless Pena is really, really struggling, and right now he is at high A, like it's been a bit of a struggle. When I watch him, other than like a couple outlier games, I don't think things have been that much different than they were in low A. I think he's had some tough luck. I think he's probably starting to press a little bit now. So I'm not as worried about him as the results may show, but I think the question in general is fair because they want to keep them together. But at some point, if Mate is performing extremely well and Pena's just not, is that really the right way to handle the development for either of them, to either keep Mate there or to move Pena with him? I'm not sure it is. So I think the Brewers' hope is that they will move together, but I don't think they're going to be completely afraid of just moving Mate to Double A next year if Pena doesn't, figure things out down the stretch, or even maybe at the end of this year, you see Mate get a chance in Biloxi like they did with Churio. Like I wouldn't rule out that happening, but I don't think they'll be afraid to do it. I think their just preference would be to keep moving them together. And hopefully Pena starts to figure things out at the high level, and then we don't even have to worry about that. But they are definitely, I mean, these guys are legitimate friends. They met at the Brewers tryout back when they were 11 or 12, and they've been playing on the same travel team before they signed with the Brewers officially. Like there's a lot of history there. So I think ideally they would like them to be there for each other, but I don't think it's going to keep them from doing what they need to do in terms of promoting those two types of players. Tim asked, he said he went to a Timber Rattlers game last week and his daughter was given a ball by Steven Cruz. Is he any kind of prospect, or is his team time in the minors coming to an end soon? So Cruz was a guy I liked quite a bit, like just after COVID. He was moving pretty quickly, pitching pretty well in a starter's role in high A, and then he ended up pretty much sticking around in high A for like 3 straight years. This year, he ended up going to Double A for a bit, but then he got demoted to high A again. When guys start to get demoted in like the high A, Double A range, that usually is starting to mean that they are just organizational depth, unfortunately. And so my guess would be Cruz is kind of teetering on the end of his Brewers tenure. I think he's got enough talent to stick around in pro ball, and my guess is someone would sign him and give him another opportunity. But he never really saw the velo jump that people were hoping for. The delivery just doesn't seem like it gets the most out of his frame, and it's a little uncomfortable in terms of just how he moves. Like it's very aggressive. There's not much stride in the delivery. Like there are a lot of things I think he could work on. So I'm curious if they hold on to him much longer. It wouldn't surprise me if they don't, but I do think there's talent there. And like I said, I do think he'll stick around in pro ball, even if they do let him go. But that can move us into the hitter section of this week. So Jose Anderson, I've talked about a few times. I wrote about him at one point about a month ago, and some of the adjustments I was seeing. He's still struggled. The strikeouts and walks have come down a little bit, but he's definitely still struggled. Coming into today, and they played a doubleheader. The Mudcats played a doubleheader today. He had a 1059 OPS for the week, a homer and 3 doubles. He'd only struck out 4 times in 22 plate appearances. He homered in one of the doubleheader games today. I haven't seen the rest of his stat line, but I did see that he homered. So there's power here, and there's a good athlete, and he's playing a solid center field. He's interesting. I'm not going to rule out Jose Anderson as a real prospect here. He's going to have to cut down the whiffs and the Ks, but I'll bet on the athleticism and the power and see what happens here. And next year will be very interesting. I want to see what he looks like in low A, kind of repeating the level in 2026 and see where he goes from there. Eric Batanti, similar issues here with the whiffs and the Ks, but he had struggled at the end of August. He had a 962 OPS this week with 3 doubles. He also homered during the doubleheader today, so good to see him hitting for power still. But again, another guy, you just got to see those strikeouts and those whiffs come down. It's going to be really hard to make it work if they don't. Jesus Mate, 869 OPS this week. He had a double. He struck out 3 times, walked 3 times. Overall in high A, he has a 982 OPS right now and a 174 WRC plus. He's been unbelievably good in high A, just really, really performing. Like I've talked about a number of times, the defense has been great. It's not just the surface level stats. Like there's been a lot of really hard hit balls, a lot of line drives. He's pulling the ball more in high A than he was in low A. It's all been very, very good for Mate at the high A level. So very excited to see where he goes from there. You can see that superstar talent that everyone has always been talking about. Luke Adams is rehabbing in high A right now. He's with the Timber Rattlers. He has a 908 OPS with 6 walks to 2 strikeouts so far, 2 doubles, 1 left the bat at 108 miles per hour. He looks exactly like the Luke Adams I've gotten used to watching. I'm hoping he goes back to Biloxi soon. It's going to be a weird fit, though, with Wilkin, Bovee, Blake Burke, and Luke Adams, who are all kind of in that first base, third base realm. Burke being only first base, and Bovee pretty much fitting into that first base only role now, too. So we'll have to see where that goes, but I'm hoping he gets back to Biloxi because I think that's a bat that would help the Shuckers, first of all, and also I think that's where he's going to be challenged the most. Brock Wilkin, like I mentioned, is back in Double-A. This week, he has an 889 OPS. He's walked 6 times to only 3 strikeouts. Had a bit of a rough second game back. I think he struck out 4 or 5 times in that game, but since then, things have been going pretty well. And then Tyler Black had a really solid week in AAA, 1063 OPS, homer, and a double. He has not been very good in AAA this year. Like, he's actually performed well in the big leagues when given a chance, but it's been very bad in AAA. He's been a well below average hitter. It's been kind of shocking to see him just really lack the actual surface level performance at that level. But like I said, he's looked better at the big league level. Maybe he's made some adjustments that are going to help him at that level. But it's pretty shocking when you look at the numbers for Black on the season. It's just really not been very good. That can lead us into the pitching side of things. Brice Message returned yesterday after missing about a month. He only pitched 1 inning, but he struck out the side on 14 pitches. I tweeted out a video of all 14 pitches. You can see everything he was throwing, but he sat 94 to 95, mixed in both his slider and his curveball, and the batters looked very uncomfortable. He got a bunch of whiffs on high fastballs in that inning. He got some pretty bad takes and swings at the breaking balls. Like that, he looked good. It was a 1 inning sample, but he had been out since the beginning of August, and it was nice to see him return and have a really nice looking outing. Ethan Dortches came in after Message and threw 6 shutout innings in relief, so that got them through 7 innings, just those 2. Dortches kind of sat in that 92 range. He was up to 94. He mixed all 3 fastball variations. He has the 4-seam, the 2-seam, and the cutter. He also threw a slider. He threw a curve, and he threw a splitter. I love the splitter. I think it's going to be a very, very good pitch for him. I'm a big fan of Dortches. He didn't have many strikeouts in this one, but he got a ton of ground balls. He got a bunch of weak contact. Big fan of Dortches and Message. Melvin Hernandez just continues to have a fantastic season in low A for the Mudcats. He went 5 2/3 shutout in his last start. He gave up 7 hits and he walked a batter, but that was the last batter he faced in that game was the walk. He struck out 5. He kind of sat in that 89 to 90 mile per hour range, but I saw more 91s than I had seen earlier in the season when he was pitching at stadiums that had guns. And I think there's been a little bit more velo throughout the season. The last 2 batters he faced, there were 2 88s and an 87 in there. So he was definitely tiring, and that probably helps explain the walk. But the changeup's a very, very good pitch. He throws a slider and a curve. I think he calls them more of like a cutter and a sweeper, but the cutter he throws is in the low 80s. Like it looks like a slider. And then the sweeper, I guess you could probably call a sweeper, but it looks more curvish to me on video. But that changeup is the best pitch. And then he does throw a 4-seam and a 2-seam. So it's a 5-pitch mix. It's a guy who's very, very young for the level, throwing in the low 90s with decent regularity. He's interesting, and he's not walking many people. On the season, he has a 4.5% walk rate, a ground ball rate of 49%. His strikeout rate's up to 19.9% after being a lot lower early in the season. He's been striking more people out. And he's also thrown 121 and 2/3 innings as a teenager in low A. Like, the Brewers are stretching him as a true starter. He has a 2.00 ERA. Melvin Hernandez is absolutely worthy of attention. And especially if we see a couple ticks go up in the velo, he is somebody I absolutely anticipate seeing on some top 30s probably next season. So he'll be one I'll continue to watch. Ryan Burchard, he had a fantastic start last Thursday while we were recording. He went 7 shutout. He also did not give up a hit in those 7 innings, and he struck out 8, only walked 1. He started in that 92 to 94 mile per hour range on the fastball, but from the 4th inning on, he was kind of sitting in that 90 to 91 range. The cutter was in the upper 80s, and then it kind of settled into those mid 80s. Changeup is a pitch that he really didn't have much in the past. Velocity wise, it does not get much separation from the other pitches, but the velo difference isn't there, like I said, but there's very good fade and pretty good depth to the pitch. Like, it's the only pitch he has that moves to his arm side. Everything else is kind of, even the fastball that he throws is bordering on like cut with carry. It's got a lot of carry, but it's pretty close to like that almost cutter range. And then he throws a really good curve. He throws a good sweeper. He throws an actual cutter. But then you add this changeup, and like I said, I'd like to see more velo differential, but it looked good. It looked a lot better than I had seen in the past. I think it made me wonder if it was maybe like a kick change variation type thing, because it was thrown pretty hard, like I said, but the movement was sharp and late. So even if he doesn't get it, I think it's at least something that moves to his arm side that he can throw to lefties, kind of get him off balance, maybe even just get grounders with it instead of it being like a huge whiff pitch. But if he can get some more velo differential, I think it could be a really solid pitch for him. He only turned 22 last month. I think he's in better shape this year, which is something I was hoping to see. There's a lot to like. Like, he's got the 10th highest whiff rate in all of minor league baseball this year. It's at 36.1% overall. In college, he had been up to 98. We haven't seen that much in pro ball, but he'll get into the mid 90s on good days. There's a lot to like with Burchard. I think it's just consistency that we need to see. And he limits walks. He performs well. That's been the case every single time this year. But when the walks start to add up, that's when he has kind of some blow up outings. And that's where the ERA gets inflated for the season. But there's a ton to like there. And then I messed this up for Jack when we were talking about the injury report, but Robert Gasser, he pitched on Wednesday. They are shortening his role, but they did have him start the game, so it wasn't really a bullpen role. He just went 3 innings. He ended up he only faced 11 batters because he had 2 hits. He struck out 5. He didn't walk anybody, and he didn't hit anybody. He had 9 whiffs, and he threw 69% of his pitches for strikes, so he was all over the zone. He was attacking. His whiff rate on the whole was 34.8%. And yeah, just a really solid 3-inning outing. I think, especially with the L. Hall's injury situation, I think we're going to see Gasser sooner rather than later. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a relatively short stint here in AAA with him trying to work into maybe a little bit more of a pen role, and then as soon as they think he's ready, I would not be surprised to see him get that call. I think it's a role he's going to be able to handle. So it was good to see him do it well in a technically not a starter's role, but I do want to see him get actual opportunities out of the bullpen for 2-3 inning stints, backing somebody up and see how that goes. But if it goes well, I wouldn't waste much time. I would start getting him up to the big leagues and letting him work from there. But that's all I've got this week. So Jack, if you want to wrap this up, I think we're good.
What would you do if I pop back in one of these weeks and said I don't want to wrap it up?
Then I'll wrap it up.
Do you want to wrap it up this time? Switch things up a little bit?
I mean, sure, I'll wrap it up.
I don't like the way you said
we could do that. Brewers are heading into Pittsburgh. Fine, then you do it. We'll make it an awkward wrap up. You do it, and I will just be quiet and just let you finish.
Fine. Like we said, Brewers are heading to Pittsburgh to kick off a road trip We'll have some more news on roster updates there. I know we teased early in the episode. I realized we never really got back to it, talking about the bullpen management. But given that we're going to have more updates at this time next week on some injury situations there, maybe that'll be a more fitting time for it anyway. But basically, it's blah, blah, blah. Murph is using too many guys too often instead of spreading out the workload, and things sometimes happen. But we'll have more info on the actual situation there at this time next week. Brewers are going to play the Pirates. They'll continue the road trip. We'll have all kinds of action to recap for you as we continue hurtling closer and closer to playoff baseball. We'll see which seed the Brewers end up with here. Still some pretty meaningful games to play. They are on a more optimistic note for fans, largely past the more challenging stretch of the schedule here that they were going through with, the lack of off days, playing some tougher opponents. So doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be smooth sailing the rest of the way, but things hopefully lining up a little bit more in the Brewers' favor. We'll see what happens in the next week, though. We'll be back with you at this time next week to break down all of the action on the Brewer Fanatic podcast. As always, thank you for listening.